Good day, dear readers and listeners of the Life on Pages portal. This is Simona, its founder and host at the microphone. Today, our guest is Zaven Vardanyan, author of the novel The Brazilian Parrot. We rarely discuss books where a spy thriller is so tightly intertwined with sharp social drama. I think our conversation will be substantial. Let me say right away, the book keeps you in suspense. It is a solid, cinematic text. But as a reader, what hooked me most was not the detective intrigue with the FBI and senators, though it is well constructed. It was the contrast. The contrast between the global injustice the heroine speaks about and the very personal, almost intimate story of two people trapped in the golden cage of a safe house. And, of course, the epilogue's ending knocks you off your feet with its realism. You did not spare the reader, and that earns respect. Tell us, where did it all begin? What was the starting point for the plot? Was it the image of an Iranian human rights activist? A desire to talk about hypocrisy in politics? Or perhaps the image of a broken hero like Peter?
Hello. Thank you for the hospitality. I hope that after our interview, no other bomb will explode here in the parking lot.
Let us hope our security works better than the heroes in your book.
Yes, you correctly noted the cinematic nature of the plot. It was originally conceived as a screenplay for a film, but in the process of writing, the old-fashioned book won over the modern movie. At some point, I realized I did not want my message distorted by a director's vision, actors' performances, the need to fit into time limits, or even musical scoring. That said, it doesn't mean I'm against films. I don't want The Brazilian Parrot to miss the big screen. I just wanted the film to have an original point of comparison, what the author intended to say, and how well the movie conveys it if or when it is made. I did not spare the reader, as you said, because we are too surrounded by fairy tales. Hollywood happy endings, if you will. But life is far from a fairy tale. Or if you want to call it a fairy tale, let it be. It is certainly a fairy tale where good ultimately defeats evil. But have you ever thought about what makes a fairy tale a fairy tale? Is it dragons, wizards, or other characters? It's the last phrase, and they lived happily ever after. So if the knight or prince saves the princess from a dragon's clutches or evil wizard's spells, is that game over? I think the real lie is right there. To live happily ever after, they need a daily struggle that is no easier than battling a dragon. So let it be. Let The Brazilian Parrot be a fairy tale, but in my understanding.
I really like your thought about the saved game. Indeed, in literature, we are used to ending on the peak of triumph. How heroes cope with routine and post-traumatic stress often stays off-stage. Your epilogue shows exactly that unfairy tale price of victory. You mentioned reformatting the screenplay into a book to preserve the author's message and avoid distortions. But if you allow, I would like to ask more about the essence of that message. You tactfully avoided answering about the heroine herself. The central nerve of the novel is not just an abstract fight for human rights. It's the very specific tragedy of the Baha'i community in Iran. The topic is very specific, sharp, and honestly not the most media-friendly for a Western thriller. Tell us, why did you choose this issue? Are you a follower of the Baha'i faith yourself? And can we say this novel is primarily your way to loudly declare a problem the world prefers to ignore?
Declare? Yes. How loudly it will be, we will see. But my declaration is not because I am Baha'i. I am Christian, if you are asking about that. And yes, you are absolutely right that the Baha'i tragedy in Iran is not the most media-covered topic. It is not on television, in glossy magazines, or in news feeds. We remain in ignorance. But sometimes these groans break through both Iran's censorship and the ring of silence in Western media. Besides media, we have friends and social circles. Once you learn about the ongoing tragedy, you can no longer excuse yourself by saying you did not know. Should I cover my eyes, ears, and mouth just because I am not Baha'i? And yes, I understand opponents might argue that all atrocities and executions on religious grounds mostly happened in the early period after the Islamic Revolution. Later, the Iranian regime became less bloodthirsty. But think about it. If they changed from executions to imprisonment, bans on education, property, that is, to slow strangulation, does that change anything? For example, the ban on education. Without education, Baha'i followers cannot become doctors, right? And who will treat them if the mad fanatics leading Iran decide to ban healthcare too? That is just one example of this slow strangulation. So no, the Iranian regime has not become less bloodthirsty. It just pretends to be. And honestly, I do not know what exactly can be done for the Baha'i community in Iran, but I know for sure that silence is not the solution. It is betrayal. Betrayal of humanism.
Indeed, when we talk about such quiet strangulation, depriving people of education, work, basic rights, it is sometimes scarier than loud headlines. It becomes the norm, and the world sadly gets used to it. Silence here truly equals complicity. But the best way to break through this wall of indifference is not dry statistics. It's a living human story that readers can connect to emotionally. In your novel, Tamina becomes that conduit of pain, but also incredible strength. She feels very real, not just a symbol of struggle, but a living woman with her fears, fatigue, and principles. The male characters, Peter and Bob, also came out very textured. Their friendship and professionalism do not seem cardboard. Tell us, do these heroes have real prototypes? Is Tamina a collective image of an Iranian woman, or did you draw inspiration from someone specific? Maybe from Mona Mahmoudnezad, whom you mention in the afterword? And if you allow a personal question, how much of you is in Peter?
When it comes to a work of fiction not based on real events, and the Brazilian Parrot is not based on real events, things always mix: what was, what never was, and what, if it were, you would want it to be that way. The same with the characters. Certainly, some are created with real people in mind. Others are collective, or even embodiments of ideas. A third group, let us call them functions. For example, the cell phone store clerk. He's needed for the plot, he appears, but carries no other meaning. Or various paramedics. Among those with real prototypes are certainly Peter and Tamina, as well as Betty G. Rose. And you may not believe it, Agents X and Y, Bradley and Morris. Bob, Donna, Dallas police officer Jerry, and the main antagonist Hawkins, they are collective images. Collective not so much as a group of people as an image of an idea. Again, with an adjustment for artistic fiction. Despite similarities in spiritual resilience, no, Tamina is not Mona Mahmoudnezad. As for Peter, if he is me, then I certainly did not serve in Iraq, did not shield anyone with my body, and did not save anyone. I can only pray that if needed, it would not be Peter being me, but me being Peter.
Agents X and Y, Bradley and Morris? Are you serious?
Yes, absolutely. With the adjustment that they were agents not of the FBI, but of another special service. But yes, I am absolutely serious.
Goodness, it's mind-boggling. Honestly, while reading the chapter Agent X, Agent Y, I thought you deliberately drew caricatured images.
I did not have to invent much. I just reproduced the level of absurdity. The rest came naturally.
Wow, truly incredible. But let us return to those you called images of ideas. I am incredibly curious to try decoding this author's cipher. Allow me to guess what stands behind these characters. You can say if I hit the mark. Bob, as it seemed to me, embodies truth and efficiency. In a world where official structures, like the FBI, are mired in bureaucracy, politics, and careerism, Bob is that good old force that just gets the job done. He is the invisible mechanism of justice that works when the system fails. And of course, loyalty, the kind that needs no extra words. Donna, for me, became the embodiment of humanity and common sense. She breaks hospital protocols not for rebellion, but for love and care. She is the living, warm principle that opposes the cold, sterile world of instructions. She reminds us that sometimes rules must be broken to remain human. And Officer Jerry is perhaps life experience or everyday wisdom. He's the only law enforcer in that hospital scene who immediately understood the essence, not from a criminology textbook, but simply because he has seen life. It is a quiet rebuke to arrogant youth and professional deformation. Am I close to the truth, or did you put entirely different meanings into these characters?
You are absolutely right about Bob. He embodies the efficiency of private initiative over cumbersome politicized bureaucracy. And he also embodies loyalty and friendship tested by fire and time. As for Donna and Jerry, let us reshuffle the deck of meanings a bit. Give common sense to Officer Jerry. It is not about criminology textbooks, but about common sense when he marvels at the phenomenal incompetence of the young and arrogant FBI agents. You correctly noted the contrast between law enforcers, namely police and FBI. After all, who is a police officer? He's your neighbor, the father of your children's classmate, someone you sometimes meet at Walmart. And if he sometimes tickets you for running a red light, well, don't run red lights. You hired him to give those tickets and make your life safer, sometimes at the cost of his own life. And as close as a police officer is to you, the FBI is just as distant. For Donna, besides humanity, let us give everyday wisdom. She embodies hard-working, ordinary people. Actually, hard might not be my favorite term. Donna does her work with love and ease. Donna is the salt of the earth. And the fact that Tamine gets very important advice from this kind-hearted worker who carries everyday wisdom, that seemed so natural to me.
Donna as the salt of the earth. That is a beautiful image. It is exactly such people standing firmly on the ground and doing their work with love who often see the situation much clearer than those floating in the clouds of high politics or instructions. But since we've dissected the light side and your allies so thoroughly, we must talk about those on the other side of the barricades. Without shadow, there is no light. Your main antagonist is Senator Grayson Hawkins. In the book, he's portrayed as a figure evoking almost physical disgust with his hypocrisy, a public knight of justice, defender of victims, but behind closed doors, a cynical predator. You mentioned the Mickey Mouse theory in the text, the idea that evil no longer bothers hiding behind a decent facade, it just boldly stares us in the face. What exactly does Hawkins symbolize in your coordinate system? Is it just abstract, corrupt power, or does his image stand for some more specific social or political illness of our time? And why did you make the villain a Western politician, not, say, an agent of Iranian special services? That would be more logical for the genre.
Well, you named the word yourself, and it resonates with the author's notes. Of course, it's hypocrisy, double standards, call it what you will, when everything for friends and the law for enemies, as one infamous dictator of the past said. An influential senator who uses his power only to gain even more power.
Hypocrisy is indeed a scary beast, especially when clothed in power and covered by slogans about justice. It makes evil not caricatured, but very recognizable and therefore frightening. By the way, speaking of Hawkins, I noticed one very interesting structural detail in your novel. He's the main antagonist, the root cause of all troubles, the puppeteer who nearly destroyed the heroes' lives, but he never appears on screen once in the whole book. We hear about him from Bob, learn of his birdie past from Tamine's story, see the consequences of his orders, the explosion, mercenaries, stolen explosives, but neither Peter nor the reader ever meets him face to face. There's no final showdown between hero and villain, no dialogue. Why did you choose this approach? Did you want to show that true evil in the modern world is impersonal and acts through others' hands from sterile offices? Or is it a way to emphasize that very gap between the elite and ordinary people you mentioned earlier?
The simple answer is that there was no need for it. But if we dig deeper, Peter does not fight anyone, does not shoot anyone, does not jump from a plane without a parachute. His weapon is intellect and foresight. In that sense, his comparison of himself to Nero Wolfe is not accidental. Peter and Senator Hawkins do not clash face to face. So what is the point in giving a human face to hypocrisy?
That is a very elegant move. Indeed, turning the hero into a kind of Nero wolf, even if forced due to injury, shifts the focus from typical action hero fights to an intellectual duel. A battle of minds, not fists, looks much more convincing here. Since we are talking about literary and cultural allusions, there is another striking moment in the book that you cannot miss, and it hits right in the heart. In the forest, when strength leaves Tamine, Peter tells her, "Mr. Frodo, I can't carry the ring for you, but I can carry you." This is a direct and very powerful reference to Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, to Sam Gamgee, perhaps the most loyal friend in world literature. This moment works not just as a joke to diffuse the situation, but as a manifesto of that supportive masculine principle that Tamine later mentions on air. Tell us, are there many more such Easter eggs and cultural codes hidden in the text? And what role do they play for you? Are they just markers of us versus them for well-read readers? Or is there something more? For example, the title itself, The Brazilian Parrot, does it hide, besides the code, a nod to Monty Python and their dead parrot? Or am I looking for meanings where there are none? Curious.
Oh no, the Brazilian parrot is not a nod to Monty Python. Why Brazilian parrot? Before answering this lengthy question, let us sort out the cultural allusions. The image of Nero Wolfe is probably not just situational, but subconscious. The thing is, consider it my personal whim, but for me personally, Rex Stout is the master detective #1. With the adjustment, of course, that Agatha Christie is entirely outside space and time. And if we count her, Rex Stout is certainly second. In the case of Mr. Frodo, yes, it is direct inspiration from Sam Gamgee. So what is the point in not declaring it outright? Another cultural allusion is Betty G. Rose. At first, she was just Betty. But as I said, she has a real prototype. When it became necessary for Betty to have a last name in the book, I decided not to go far and asked the prototype. She said, Rose. I smiled and added G. She is a big fan of Guns N' Roses. So consider that another cultural allusion.
What a wonderful detail about Betty. Guns N' Roses, that fits her character perfectly, given her energy, directness, and that rocker devotion to the cause. And your hierarchy of detectives, Rex Stout right after the extraterrestrial Agatha Christie, explains well intellectual duels are more important to you and your heroes than meaningless shootouts. But now that we have dismissed the Monty Python version, and thank goodness, otherwise it would be a completely different comedy of the absurd, we must return to what we started but did not finish. The mysterious Brazilian parrot. It sounds bright, exotic, and completely unexpected for a story about Iran, the FBI, and U.S. political intrigues. Why him? Is it some personal metaphor for Peter, a reference to something left off screen in his past? Or is the image encrypted with a key to understanding the whole book?
Imagine a paranoid like Peter. No, he does not wear a tinfoil hat. His paranoia is a result of his past experience. He served in Iraq. Then he worked with Bob in investigative journalism. For many years, he got used to the enemy is listening. Well, let them listen. And what will they hear in the phrase, Bob, I came back from Brazil yesterday, brought you the album of local parrots you asked for? Or, Bet, starting tomorrow you're on a week's vacation. He is always ready. He has his code words, cash for a rainy day. Mostly, he lives a completely ordinary life. But when you are lying face down because of a back wound from a bomb explosion, that is the rainy day. And he pulls out his code phrase to tell his friend to switch to an encrypted channel. And it is not just the phrase Brazilian parrot, but in some combination, in one sentence, he uses the words Brazil and parrot. It is an arbitrary choice of two words. However, Tamina breathed life into this soulless code phrase. When she says, call Bob and say that Brazilian parrots love to eat slimy worms, the phrase starts living its own life.
It turns into Brazilian parrots have flown out of their cages, and then into the Brazilian parrot is dead.
Now everything falls into place. So the Brazilian parrot is not just an exotic image, but a kind of indicator of the hero's state. Tamina breathed life into the phrase. That is unusual, and it is amazing to watch how this phrase evolves through the plot. First, a key to enter a secure chat, then a metaphor for retribution, eat worms, then a signal for media attack, and finally, in the epilogue, a symbol of personal defeat and loss. And here we come to that very last, most bitter variation of the phrase. The Brazilian parrot is dead. Peter says it like a sentence to himself, closing a chapter of his life. But Betty, and here her wisdom and persistence show again, does not agree with this diagnosis. In the very finale, she gives Peter perhaps the most important advice, or even order, of these 6 years. Call her. Call Tamina. Tell us honestly, as the author who knows his heroes best, will Peter listen to his little sister? Will he make that call? And if yes, what will Peter say to Tamina after 6 years of silence and self-flagellation? What words can even start such a conversation?
No, not 6 years of silence. Let us start with that. It is not like Peter came out of a coma and immediately pushed Tamina away. That would be illogical. He directly tells Betty that he denied her simple human happiness. He lost the peace, not renounced it. And he also tells Betty that he let Bob down too, because Bob was so happy for them. What human happiness did he deny her? Something happened during those 6 years. Maybe Bob's death was a shock for Peter, or maybe they faced that very everyday routine and they made the game-saved mistake too. Let the reader figure it out. And then, when he realized his mistake, he, in his words, started looking for her in others and did not find her, because there is no other like her. Instead of fixing his mistake, or at least trying, he pushed her away harder and more painfully, and that is how he stole the fire from her eyes.
Will Peter follow Betty's advice? Do you think he hasn't thought about it himself and needed Betty's urging as a trigger? But suppose he calls. What else can a person feeling deep guilt say? Only 2 words. Forgive me. Will she forgive? And why would she?
Losing the peace, that is perhaps the most tragic phrasing possible. You are right, self-destruction is a slow poison, and fear of simple happiness sometimes paralyzes more than fear of death. And surely that phone has been burning his hands every day all this time, not just after Betty's visit. Forgive me. Just 2 words, but sometimes they weigh more than whole volumes of excuses. You ask, why would she forgive him? That's a tough question, realistic, but allow me, as a reader who went through these 19 chapters with them, to act as an advocate for hope. Can we so easily cross out the fact that he literally gave her life? And I'm not talking now even about the moment in the office when he shielded her with his back from shrapnel, taking the hit himself. I'm talking about what came after, about that night trek through the forest when, bleeding out, he carried her on his shoulders, joking about Mr. Frodo so she wouldn't be so scared. About that feeling of absolute protection she felt next to him when the whole world was crumbling. Tamina is a wise woman. She sees the essence of things. Remember what she said on ZNN Air? She spoke of another masculinity, sacrificial, protective. She saw his soul, saw him for real. Can such a bond, sealed with blood, shared struggle, and that very magic that can't be faked, disappear without a trace, even under the weight of these years of resentment and silence? Maybe she will forgive him not because she must, but because she's the only one who knows what Peter Rue is really like when he's not trying to punish himself.
Well, I understand your soul still demands a Hollywood happy ending, and you are right, Tamina will almost certainly forgive him. But you are answering as Simona to the book's author, when the question is as if from Peter. It is Peter asking, why would she forgive me? And he asks it not to Simona, but to himself. Because if Peter starts answering himself because I saved her, in his own eyes he will turn into an emotional abuser. Something like, because I physically saved you, you owe me for life, despite emotionally draining you, right? Peter would rather humbly accept his own self-destruction than do that to Tamina, even if it is not really so. Moreover, Peter sentenced himself to this, for there is no judge harsher than when you are your own judge.
You just killed my hope for a happy ending. That is a very subtle and important psychological nuance. And you're right. What looks like hope for love's salvation from the outside, from inside, through Peter's eyes, can look like trying to bill for heroism. He is his own harshest judge, and this internal tribunal knows no appeals. It makes his tragedy even deeper. He punishes himself with loneliness, believing he deserves nothing else. But in the epilogue, we get another heavy blow that finally closes Peter's circle of loneliness. Bob, the loyal friend, brother-in-arms, brilliant detective who essentially unraveled this tangle. We learn he is gone. Leukemia. Why did you decide to kill Bob? After all, he was the very backbone Peter relied on. Was his death necessary for the plot, just to leave Peter in absolute vacuum, to heighten his isolation? Or does Bob's departure have some symbolic meaning? Maybe it is a sign that the time of such people, people of old school with notions of honor and brotherhood, is irrevocably gone.
How else could the Brazilian Parrot die with Bob alive? You were scared to death. You want to leave everything and run. But at some point, the fear of shame becomes stronger than the fear of death, and you stay, shoulder to shoulder with your comrade, covering his back. And you win, Peter says. Would a living Bob allow Peter to get scared, run, and thereby lose the peace? The phrase, the Brazilian Parrot is dead, at one end implies Peter's self-destruction, and at the other implies the physical death of Bob. So yes, it is a plot necessity, and specifically from illness, not at the hands of villains. Otherwise, Peter's engine would be fueled by something entirely different, if you know what I mean. However, later I realized that perhaps subconsciously, or maybe accidentally, I added another ominous layer to the narrative. Bob symbolizes the triumph of private initiative's efficiency over cumbersome bureaucracy, as well as loyalty and friendship, and he is dead. Donna and Jerry are also far from young. Jerry is soon retiring, and Donna, she's not young either. Replacing them are young careerists like the faceless, rather stupid, and possibly unprincipled Agents X and Y, and that gives Bob's death from leukemia a completely different meaning.
Indeed, if enemies had killed Bob, Peter would have a purpose, at least in the form of revenge. Death from illness leaves him alone with existential emptiness, which is much more tragic and deeper. And the symbolism of the old guard departing, Bob, Donna, Jerry, reads very sharply. It creates a sense that the world is becoming more fragile and less competent. The adults leave, leaving us alone with ambitious but empty Agents X and Y. And here, on this note of collision with harsh reality, we come to the very end of your book. After the emotional epilogue, you make a very unexpected move. Instead of the usual "the end," the reader stumbles upon an author's note, which sharply differs in style and content from the rest of the text. It is 3 parts of harsh journalism. Part A, dry, terrifying statistics on the persecution of Baha'is in Iran. Part B, a legal overview of the powerless position of women in Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. And Part C, direct criticism of Western feminism for hypocrisy and selective blindness. Why did you choose this format? Usually authors try to dissolve facts in dialogues or plot to not overload the reader. You, on the contrary, put it in a separate manifesto that works like a bucket of ice water after the fictional story. Was this the original goal, to use the novel as a Trojan horse to make the audience read exactly these final pages with facts?
The thing is, while working on the book, or rather on the screenplay that became the book, I kept in mind an audience of 2 readers. Not abstractly 2 people, but very specific readers, at completely different life stages. On one hand, that imposed certain conditions, or if you will, limitations. On the other, it helped keep the plot from veering off. One such temptation was to put dry statistics in Temine's mouth during her interview with Peter.
and it is good I did not give in. From that, Temine turned out very alive, as she should be, not a mouthpiece for announcing dry statistics. But without this factology, the story would be crumpled, arising as if from nowhere. Remember, the original idea was to break through the ring of silence around the real Baha'i tragedy in Iran as much as possible. And this format, as I think and hope, serves both goals. It speaks about the Baha'i tragedy in Iran, and it tells the young reader that life, that reality, is not just green meadows where pink unicorns graze. Rather, it is a completely different, harsh place. And if by some miracle we manage to create a place on Earth with relative well-being, that place must be cherished, not ruthlessly destroyed just because it is not perfect.
Indeed, if you turned Temine's dialogues into an Amnesty International report, the characters' magic would crumble and the reader would feel like they were in a lecture, not inside a drama. This way, the pink unicorns stay outside and reality hits with facts exactly where appropriate, at the end. But your phrase about how our relative well-being must be cherished, not destroyed in pursuit of an unattainable ideal, leads us to a very interesting, I would say sharp, contradiction. Let us figure out who in your universe is the real destroyer. In the fictional part of the novel, the main, tangible evil is Senator Grayson Hawkins, a corrupt politician, a man clothed in power, a classic establishment representative. He's the one who uses the system for his dirty purposes. However, in your author's note in the journalistic part, the vector of criticism shifts sharply. There, you harshly critique Western feminism, accusing the movement of hypocrisy, of focusing on trifles like pay gaps, while in the East, women are literally killed for existing. Is there no conflict here? On one side, the villain senator, patriarchy and power. On the other, criticism of those who theoretically should fight him, activism. Who do you think does more harm to our civilization? Those who commit evil directly, like Hawkins or the Iranian regime, or those who, as you see it, choose wrong priorities and destroy what exists instead of real struggle?
Yes, you are right. At first glance, the focus shifts, but that is only at first glance. And I won't even argue that a villainess could be in Senator Hawkins' place. True, the choice of crime tool and motive would differ, but with great desire, a female villain could hire thugs, and the plot would not suffer much. But ultimately, the main villain is Senator Hawkins, and the focus of criticism in the author's note is modern feminism, again, at first glance. However, if we go one step deeper, it is not hard to find a common trait between these two, namely, hypocrisy. Senator Hawkins, a politician who has mastered the art, in quotes, of pretending to be almost the ideal of piety, he fights, in quotes, domestic violence, while behind closed doors he is a predator, the embodiment of what he supposedly fights. As for comparing priority tasks, yes, I understand, your own shirt is closer to the body, but again, is it not hypocritical, on one hand, to focus on what I called in the book a whisper, even to the point of destroying the fabric of social morality, and on the other, to call the groans and cries of pain from others cultural features? And speaking of destroying the fabric of social morality, I mean the difference in the value of men's lives on one side and women's and children's on the other. I am proud that, this may sound cynical, but I am proud to be part of a civilization where the value of a man's life is much lower than that of a woman or child. We do not trade women and children. I am not talking about criminal elements because we catch and jail them. We do not hide behind women, we shield them with our bodies. We willingly drown when the captain of the Titanic orders women and children first, and as a result, 3 out of 4 women on board are saved, while only 1 out of 5 men survives. We do not send children to minefields to clear the way for us on the battlefield. We do not give them rifles and teach them to kill. We do not marry off 9-year-old girls, sometimes for money. Yes, again, this may sound cynical, but it is because the value of women and children's lives in our society is higher than men's. At least that was so until feminism started fighting this injustice, in quotes, and now we pretend to be women and steal their medals. Prove to me that this is not because feminism deprived men of their role as protectors. Prove to me that this is not because we so distorted events in an Oscar-winning film. Prove it to me. Remember what the road to hell is paved with? Hypocrisy. That is what unites them.
Your analogy with the Titanic and the concept of sacrifice puts everything in place. Now Peter's portrait becomes fully complete. He is not just a man in love or a former soldier. He's the embodiment of that very principle, women and children first, a living relic of the coordinate system that, as you claim, is being eroded by modern trends. His tragedy in the epilogue is the tragedy of a person whose protector function turned out unclaimed or rejected in the new world. I think in this monologue about hypocrisy and the value of life, you have put a very powerful, though bitter period that exhaustively explains the DNA of your novel. Summing up our conversation, I want to say that my perception of The Brazilian Parrot has changed greatly during our talk. At first, I saw a solid political thriller with elements of melodrama, but now I see that it is essentially a book manifesto, or even a book requiem for a certain type of masculinity and morality. Behind the spy games, code phrases about parrots, and warm scenes in the forest cabin hides harsh criticism of modernity. It is a story about how dangerous it is to replace real actions with beautiful words, and that evil, whether in Tehran or Minnesota, thrives exactly where we fear to call things by their names. This is a bold book. It is uncomfortable. It will surely spark debates, especially with its documentary part. But that is what makes literature alive, the ability to provoke dialogue. Thank you very much for coming and being so frank. I wish The Brazilian Parrot finds its reader, the one ready to look beyond the facade of pink unicorns and see reality as it is.
Thank you for inviting me as a guest.
It was an honor for me. I am sure our conversation will make many think not only about the hero's fates, but also about the world around us. Good luck to The Brazilian Parrot in its flight to readers' hearts. Goodbye.